during the morning hours on Tuesday. You're looking at the grand ballroom of the Marriott Marquis Hotel in New York City, just a shade away from Times Square in the Big Apple, where in less than 1 minute, National Football League Commissioner Pete Rozelle will step to the podium and kick off the 1986 National Football League Collegiate Player Draft. Hi, everyone, and welcome to ESPN's 7th consecutive year of coverage of the National Football League Collegiate Player Draft. I'm George Graham. We're going to be here for the next 8 hours to keep you up to date on what's happening with the NFL Draft of 1986. The first pick in this draft belongs to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And when Commissioner Rozelle steps up in just a couple of seconds to update us on that first pick, the question is, who will they select? The big discussion has been, of course, Bo Jackson, the Heisman Trophy winner of 1986. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, for the 5th time in the last 11 years, have the first pick, and the commissioner with that selection.
The 51st annual NFL selection meeting is now in session. First choice, first round, Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
There you see the Tampa Bay Buccaneers table, and as the day progresses, as you can see, there will be no mistaking this. The Buccaneers will make a pick. There will not be a trade. And Paul Zimmerman of Sports Illustrated, who joins us for the 7th consecutive year, there has been a lot of talk about a possible trade, but it appears they're going with Bo Jackson.
Yeah, that was the talk a month ago. Our spies saw Jackson and Gallagher's last night eating fish, so that's kind of suspicious. Fish at Gallagher, that's like beer at Robert Mondavi's.
The Tampa Bay Bucks and the #1 pick have had a strange relationship. In 77, they could have taken Tony Dorsett. They didn't. In 78, they traded away their pick, which eventually was Earl Campbell. And here is the commissioner.
Tampa Bay, the Buccaneers select first choice on the first round. Running back from Auburn, Bo Jackson.
The Heisman Trophy winner, Bo Jackson from Auburn, and you can hear the crowd here at the Marriott Marquis Hotel. During the course of our coverage for the next 8 hours, Bob Lee and Paul McGuire will be filling us in on these athletes that are selected and their credentials. Let's go to Bob.
Well, George, the big question certainly with Bo Jackson is the baseball question. Paul McGuire, we will be, of course, the next 8 hours looking at these players, plugging in into their teams, looking at their college careers, and also looking at the way they are assessed. Bo Jackson's been called the best we have seen the last number of years, better than Eric Dickerson.
Well, we had an opportunity, ESPN, to do college football and do Bo Jackson since he was a sophomore, Bob, and the guy is just an outstanding football player, and they say he's better than O.J. Simpson was at that time. But I think the funny thing about Bo is he's not committing himself to anything, because the first thing he said, I will not make a decision until June, until the draft of baseball. And the question is, can someone say, okay, Bo, you're going to play baseball, but you're going to play in the majors right away? And I think that would be the biggest decision.
We'll be talking more about that baseball-football question throughout the day, but he is the center of attention because of the baseball and the football question, and also because he is the consensus and has been the #1 big pressure in the National Football League. Can he handle it?
Well, I don't let pressure get to me, and besides, once I leave Auburn, what I do after that, it becomes a job, so I'll have to put up with it.
Bo Jackson out of Auburn, the superlatives Paul McGuire just come left and right. There were some questions at one point, and even in Zim's product, SI, a question about his durability, whether he took himself out of games. That's the way Auburn players are coached, though.
You know, doing the games many times we did, and having the opportunity to talk to Pat Dye, it's the option for every single one of his players, Bob, is they have that option. If they feel that they're not 100%, then they're allowed to take themselves out of the ball game. And when he's the only one that knew how good, how well he was during the course of a ball game. And if he wasn't 100%, they had people behind him that weren't that bad.
He showed us in the Cotton Bowl as well he can catch the football, and we know certainly from watching him all year on ESPN, he certainly can run the football. We will be grading out our players throughout the day on a combination of numbers. Those are the numbers that he racked up on the field, 17 touchdowns this year. And based on a variety of scouting reports, we'll be putting these players into perspective based on a 20-point system with Bo Jackson, the #1 selection from Tampa Bay. And of course, we're waiting now to see what Atlanta does with Houston. Chris Berman is with us, along with Howard Balzer, all the sporting news, and we talked about rating the players. Chris, we've got the big board. We'll see how quickly they fall off that board.
All right, Robert, thank you very much. We are, yes, in front of the big board. It's kind of the way the various teams set up everything in their war room, Howard Balzer. They without regard to position, behind you can see some of the names. We have put together the top 60-odd players. And, of course, Bo Jackson, people are saying maybe Eric Dickerson in the last 20 years, but that's about it for running backs.
I think the one key thing about the board is that you have to separate a lot of times positions, offense and defense. Our board indicates that Tony Casillas is slightly rated better than Bo Jackson, but that's on a combination of defensive things that he would use in the pros as opposed to Bo Jackson. What we don't have on the board, though, is where Bo Jackson rates as a baseball player. And that might end up being more important than where he rates as a football player, because it has been said he's waiting for June. But I know if I'm the Tampa Bay Buccaneers right now, I'm pretty nervous because they really didn't make a tremendous effort before the draft to sign him. And now they know he's going to play the negotiating game to the hilt. And we just have to wait until June to see where things really start getting juicy.
Of course, as the day unfolds, we will be referring to the board, and you can see a little bit how our rating systems work and maybe how teams are trying to use the quote, I'll use it for the first time today, best athlete available, regardless of position. Sometimes they look at that draft board. Bo Jackson was definitely the best athlete available. That's why he's picked by the Bucs. Let's go back to George Grant.
Thank you, Chris. Best athlete available. Bobby Betther did give that to us yesterday, so we'll say it's a draw between you and Bobby. ESPN's live and continuous coverage of the 1986 National Football League Collegiate Player Draft will continue after this timeout. The 1986 National Football League Collegiate Player Draft is being brought to you by The Hartford, the insurance people of ITT, and by McDonald's. It's a good time for the great taste of McDonald's.
To Adventures in Insurance. Today we're with a man in the fast food business. What kind of food do you serve, sir?
Toast and thick shakes. I feature white, whole wheat, rye, or pumpernickel, buttered on the near or far side.
You have insurance?
So it works. Plus an installment plan that lets me pay premiums monthly, quarterly, or semi-annually without interest charge from my Hartford.
All company with the moose.
It's a stag.
By the way, what kind of thick shakes do you offer?
Prune.
Year after year, you'll like doing business with the Hartford, the insurance people of ITT.
Out on the road, hungry for home, where everything's as good as can be. Where the hot's really hot, and the cool's so cool. We're going home with McDLT. Stop, stop, first family is singing out loud. Stop, for the best burger, best home. It's a good time for the break. Yeah, McDLT, you sing our song.
Sencorp Sports and Celebrity Management. The professionals for the professionals. Player representation, financial planning, product endorsement.
The first pick in the draft.
When your number is called, call this number.
Welcome back to ESPN's coverage of the 1986 National Football League Collegiate Player Draft. We are waiting on the second pick of the draft. The Atlanta Falcons, who finished 4-12 last year. It is expected that they will select Tony Casillas, as it stands right now, one of the finest linemen in the country this year. During the course of the day, we'll be checking with our Sports Look studio. On the West Coast, Roy Firestone is standing by with Mel Kiper.
Okay, George, thank you very much. You have to get up pretty early in the morning to stay with this ESPN crew, I'll tell you that. As a matter of fact, it's 10 after 5 in the West Coast in the morning. Mel Kiper is standing by with us. We saw, of course, Bo Jackson picked right away. No surprise there, certainly. But one of the top takes in the top 5 that you selected is John Hanna to Alabama. And one of the things that is intriguing is that you said he's failed many physicals early on in the scouting system.
He really has, Roy. That's the problem as far as Houston was concerned. Now they're probably forced to either draft Jim Everett or trade the selection. Of course, they were interested in John Hand at one time. He failed their physical. Of course, now the Indianapolis Colts are sitting there. They traded up to get that selection, hopefully to get Jim Everett. Now they traded for Hogaboom yesterday, swapped second-round selections with Dallas. They're in a position now where they may go for John Hand. Of course, Chuck Long's also a possibility. But I don't know if they realize that Hand has been failing physicals right and left because of a knee injury he sustained at the East-West Shrine game.
Of course, we're going to be talking about a number of the issues involving the NFL draft. We'll also be talking live to a number of players, existing players in the National Football League, including Howie Long of the Los Angeles Raiders, Mike Haynes as well. We'll be talking also about the issues and updating you on what's going on the West Coast version. Reporting live from Los Angeles, where it's 10 after 5. Back to George in New York. George?
Good morning, and we'll be following the story from the West Coast all day long as we continue our coverage of the '86 draft. Jim, the Atlanta Falcons, Tony Casillas could be the keynote to a switch of their defensive philosophy this year.
Yeah, he could be, but right now, that pick wasn't announced right away, which means that they're on the phone to somebody. They're probably getting better offers right now than they've gotten for the last month or so. The longer they wait, the closer they are to a trade. I thought they just announced it right away, Casillas, but now it looks like there's some action.
There has been a lot of talk on this whole first round about the possibility of trading. Has not started with the Atlanta Falcons. Most of it started with the third pick in Houston. If it happens now, what kind of an effect would that have on the rest of this round?
Well, Houston loves to be in this driver's seat. I mean, they played this game before in the wheeling and deal game. The last time they did it was they let Dickerson go and they let Kurt Warner go, two Pro Bowl players. It was a double relief drive shot for the Rams. And they got some good, useful players. But teams hope their team by getting their number 1, 2, 3 players in the area.
Is Tony Casillas the best defensive player in this draft?
That's what all the scouts say. Personally, I like Mike Ruth better. I mean, you'll see our board has Ruth way up high. That's not my doing. And everybody, I'm the only person in the world who likes Mike Ruth better than Tony Casillas, but I like it.
Bob Lee and Paul McGuire, how do you evaluate a player like Tony Casillas?
Well, Casillas, all the notoriety. I lost a little bit of time. We're talking about the evaluation and big board back and forth. And, of course, Atlanta with Casillas and then Houston. And just talk about Houston just for a second. For those that might think that Houston was finished with quarterbacks, we went long and line about this one. Just because they traded for Hogaboom doesn't mean that Jim Everett isn't going to go to Indianapolis, I should say, because Hogaboom went to Indy. So Houston might be blowing a little bit of smoke.
I think this has all been a smokescreen by Houston to say, okay, Indy, we want to trade. If you want to trade down to that pick, you should do want Everett. And I think Indianapolis is still going to take Everett if he's there, even though they did get Hogaboom. One of the exciting things for me today, Bob, is going to be the fact that when we sit here and listen to how many people through the course of these last month or so, good friends of Paul Zimmerman, that lied to him, telling them who they were going to pick, and they didn't. And see how good Paul does again this year.
Well, predicting a selection in this draft once you get beyond the top 5 is like trying to find a taxi cab driver in the city that was born in the city. You just really cannot do it. Let's take a look at Tony Casillas and see how he grades out, and take a look at him in action from this past year. 208 tackles and 18 sacks for Casillas, 6'2 1/2", 277 pounds. They say he could be the best defensive tackle, and really a nose man, plays directly over the ball. 19.7. And since we've been rating people on the 20-point system, various categories, a 5-point maximum in each area. He's the highest rated player, Paul, since we've been putting these ratings together. This is our 7th year of covering the draft. So those are the numbers that are certainly reflected in the Atlanta board as they look to make their decision.
Bob, and he's the kind of guy that is a true nose tackle. You know, and you mentioned that he is a true nose tackle. They don't have to move somebody in there. They don't have to worry about developing him at that position. He can play.
He's perhaps the most highest rated true nose tackle to go this time. And this is a position when they first went to a 3-4. Nose tackle was cannon fodder. Now it's a position that's acquired some finesse to it.
And he's the kind of guy that is going to step in and play. And that's when you pick a number 1 draft pick. You want a guy, and at least all the fans think that that's going to happen, and this kind of guy can step right in and play.
Shouldn't be any suspense here. Let's see.
Atlanta Falcons, first choice, Tony Casillas, nose tackle, Oklahoma.
So
Next
Casillas
up, Houston Oilers.
is the number 2 selection overall in the draft with Atlanta. Now the clock is ticking on Houston. They have 15 minutes to make their move. Whether it will be a trade, whether it will be a selection to be followed by Indianapolis, we will see. Our 7th consecutive year of live coverage of the National Football League draft continues.
Excuse me. Is this Doylestown Federal?
Why, yes, it is, sir. How can I help you?
Well, you see my mask? I'm a robber. This is a stick-up.
Wow, is this a real robbery?
Yes, this is the real thing, all right.
You know, there's something I've always wanted to ask you guys. Does that stocking mask hurt?
Well, I used to have trouble talking through it.
You're doing fine. I can understand every word you're saying.
Thank you. Now, do you have any money?
Today is your lucky day. Now at Doylestown Federal, we have plenty of money to lend.
I don't think you understand.
Just about any good reason to borrow money is good enough for us. I assume you know about our rates and payment terms.
Maybe you're having trouble hearing me through this mask.
Look, to get your loan, just visit Doylestown Federal's Personal Loan Center at our Cross Keys office.
Okay, but could you at least lend me $1 for gas to get me there?
I don't think that'll be necessary, sir. That nice gentleman over there would be happy to drive you.
Doylestown Federal Savings and Loan, an equal opportunity lender.
What's that you're shaving with?
A Norelco.
Looks terrific.
Well, it is America's leading electric. It's rechargeable, it's guaranteed, and it gives me a fantastic shave.
As close as a blade?
Yep. Feel.
Wow.
It's our patented system that lifts each whisker up and shaves it off blade close.
I love it when you talk high-tech.
What do you think of the Norelco Ladies Rechargeable I gave you?
Terrific. What do you think?
Sensational.
Norelco. We put quality first.
The clock is rolling on the number 3 selection, 13 minutes and counting, just under 13 now for Houston, to be followed by Indianapolis, which was the pick for which they traded with New Orleans. It'll be Houston to pick, then Indy, and then St. Louis. We talked about Paul McGuire, Tony Casillas, and the way that playing right over the ball, the nose position has acquired some finesse to it with, of course, the needed power, and Casillas does it better than anybody. Might be the best defensive lineman out of Norman and ever, maybe?
Well, just when you take a look at him, he has 2 people on him at all times. There are always 2 blockers, and in that case here, actually there were 3 blockers, so Casillas gets in and makes the play. He's the kind of guy that if a nose tackle, what he must do is make sure that 2 people block him.
19.7 on our 20-point system in the various categories, the highest-rated player ever. So Jackson to Tampa Bay, Casillas to Atlanta. Now we wait to see George Grant what Houston will do, and whether we'll have a surprise or a first trade of draft day.
Tim, when you look at the Houston Oilers, they were the next to last defensive team in the league, so they need defense. But can they pass up at Jim Everett at this stage? Lad Herzig has really played it down the middle, as he usually does.
Yeah, the defense they needed was a nose guard. That's what they wanted. They wanted Casillas. I think they felt he'd be gone. The defensive end, it would be logical, John Hand or O'Neill. Well, he joins them up. I mean, they've been drafting defensive ends the last few years. Last year, Childress, you know, they've got a bunch. So do they throw them in the hopper to compete with a lot of young players, or do they take the quarterback, who everybody wants to trade for it, Jim Everett? Now they're admitting that they made a mistake on Warren Moon. If they try and get rid of him, that's $1 million contract. Somebody's got to pick up on a player who's going to be a reject. And now, how's Warren Moon going to feel? It's very complicated. And once again, Houston, in a high pick, has managed to be in a turmoil position.
No less than 8 teams have contacted Houston for this pick. Who would be the most likely teams to work a deal?
I think the Rams, but they'd have to do like a double leapfrog. It's very hard to get from down there to up here. When they got Dickerson, they had to do a double jump, and they did it. Of course, Houston traded 2 Pro Bowl players then, the shot for Dickerson, the shot for Warner. They got veterans, guys who were useful, but, you know, you don't really get rich trading that high pick when you got a franchise player sitting there, if you think somebody is.
Historically, has it paid off, something like that?
No, it hasn't. I mean, Dallas got 2 Tall Jones, Tony Dorsett, and Randy White, the backbone of their team, by trading up. The guys they got rid of, I mean, Craig Morton, Tody Smith, Billy Parks, some guys who are useful, but, you know, not Pro Bowl players. There's never been a Pro Bowl player emerging from guys who were traded for one of those high picks.
Other than a nose tackle, defensively, what would Houston look for?
Defensively, they probably want a linebacker, but they could get one in the second round. maybe a defensive back. But no, I don't think it's logical to look for defense. I mean, the strength of this draft is offense. There are great running backs, good offensive linemen, two great quarterbacks. You know, if they don't trade the pick, it'll be offense. But they could trade the pick.
As you can see, their outside and other inside linebacker staff, from the standpoint of looking at the athletes, if they should take a quarterback, if they take Everett, they've got Warren Moon, they've got Oliver Luck, they could still possibly trade after they take a Jim Everett, couldn't they?
Well, the only time that's been done recently is when Elway's agent, Marvin Demoff, didn't want him to go to the Colts. Now, Everett's agent is Marvin Demoff, and he hasn't said the same thing about the Colts, who looked like they were going to pick him, because Dowhauer is the Colts coach, and he's a good quarterback coach. Bush wasn't. Now, how they'll feel about Everett going to Houston, well, maybe they'll say we won't go, and so they'll have to trade him. I don't know. It gets complicated.
Well, during the course of this day, as we continue to keep you up to date on the National Football League Collegiate Player Draft, we're going to be taking a look at some of the teams that have not done as well in the draft with the premium picks over the years. Chris Berman takes a look back.
Draft in the blue chip rounds are the first and second rounds. Take the AFC East clubs, the Colts and the Bills. The Colts haven't been in the playoffs at all in the 80s, and the Bills have managed to win only 12 games since Chuck Knox shuffled off from Buffalo to the Kingdom. Between them, these two teams have exercised a total of 35 blue chip selections, but have only 3 Pro Bowl players to show for their collective efforts. At the same time, AFC East rivals the Dolphins and the Patriots have utilized a combined total of 28 blue chip choices that have produced 8 Pro Bowl participants in the same 6 drafts. Now, the Colts and the Bills have made their mistakes in bunches. The Colts drafted Art Schlichter and John Elway, only to wind up with Mike Pagel at quarterback. The Bills drafted Jim Kelly and passed up the chance to take Bernie Kosar, and their starting quarterback now is Bruce Matheson.
I think Buffalo's in a great position now to take what they're going to get what they want, which is a receiver or a defensive back.
You know, they can't throw the ball and they can't catch the ball, so they had a shot at Kosar, they passed it up. Had a shot at the best receiver, they passed it up. You know, I don't know how people think you build a team.
Go back to commissioner. Has signed quarterback Burt Jones and traded him to Los Angeles for the Rams' first choice in this draft, which is the upcoming choice. 4th pick in the first round, and the Rams' second choice in this draft. So Burt Jones is traded by the Colts to Los Angeles. The Colts now pick on the first round choice of the Rams. Baltimore Colts select in the Rams spot on the first round quarterback Art Schlichter at Ohio State.
The Colts couldn't make up their minds between Schlichter or Jim McMahon until the day of the draft. Owner Bob Irsay thought of Schlichter as the better prospect. It was a gamble that backfired in more ways than one.
All right, on the last pick of the first round, selection by the Buffalo Bills, Booker Moore, running back, Penn State.
I still, you know, James Wilder, I thought of Missouri, here's a guy, 6'2", 225, as opposed to Booker Moore, who is 5'10", 205. Now, they've got a fullback, Curtis Brown, that's that same height now.
Picking in place of Denver, Buffalo selects Perry Tuttle, wide receiver, Clemson.
The Bills actually traded up to draft Tuttle ahead of Mike Quick, whom the Eagles were forced to settle for. Tuttle, a teammate of Dwight Clark's at Clemson, was another overdue Bill, while Quick went all the way to the Pro Bowl.
Baltimore selects as the first choice in the draft quarterback John Elway of Stanford. Buffalo selects quarterback Jim Kelly, Miami of Florida.
Of course, neither Elway nor Kelly wound up playing for either team that originally drafted them. Elway has taken the Broncos to the playoffs twice, while Kelly gambled on the USFL in Houston, and along with Herschel Walker will spend this fall marching the Generals down the field. Of course, the fans in Buffalo are wondering when they'll ever get to see Jim Kelly, except here on ESPN. As for the fans in Baltimore, they don't have to worry anymore. It's Indianapolis's problem as they watch their Colts decide at quarterback between the incumbent Mike Pagel or newly acquired Gary Hogeboom.
Of course, when we talk trade, the fact that the Colts picked up Gary Hogeboom yesterday, does that take them out of the sweepstakes for Jim Everett, or you think there's still going to be a possibility that they're interested?
I don't know. I'm trying to get caught up here. I'm writing down Burt Jones.
Select first on the first round.
Coming a little too fast for us.
Select third on the first round. Quarterback, Purdue, Jim Everett. Next choice
Okay, there you have it. So the Houston Oilers have taken Jim Everett. The speculation on a trade, and obviously the discussion went on for the first couple of minutes of their selection time. We should point out again, there are 15 minutes during the course of this first round where the teams will have a chance to select their players. You have 15 minutes on the first round. There's been a change this year. The second round is only 10 minutes. Then after that, each round will be 5 minutes. We are waiting on the Indianapolis Colts selection. We'll be back with ESPN's coverage of the draft after this.
At Everett and which team is looking long. I would say more teams preferred Everett to Long, but there are others that agree with what we have, that Chuck Long is the guy.
It shows how close they are rated together. Really, Long, I think, is the type of guy who could step right in now and play sooner than a Jim Everett. Everett really hasn't been a starter that long in college. He still has to develop some things down the road. That might be a reason that Houston decided to go with him. They have Warren Moon. He's no youngster. He's 30 years old. Yes, he has 2 years left on his contract, but if Everett can come along, then, hey, you got to try to improve your team no matter what you're paying the guys you have now. And I think if you ask 28 personnel guys in the NFL to pick one or the other, half might take Everett, half might take Long.
About Warren Moon, now what do they do with Everett and Moon? Now, I don't know whether they think Everett can step right in and play, but we do know this, that Warren Moon signed that big contract coming down from Canada. A good deal of the money, more than most people think, was up front. So that as far as the trade goes, it's not as if they were to trade Warren Moon, they're not peddling a guy that's earning $1 million a year. It's not going to be as tough. His salary is probably in the $400,000 range.
I don't think Warren Moon's going to be traded. If they're committed to Jim Everett as their future quarterback, then they will stay with him. Warren Moon will play, and they'll bring Everett along. If they wanted a quarterback who was going to play right away, they might have taken Chuck Long rather than Warren Moon. I think the interesting thing now is with the Colts up, is they made a trade, of course, about 10 days ago to get into position, apparently, to try and draft Jim Everett, never thinking that Houston might do that. Don't be surprised if the Colts turn around and now try to trade back down and maybe recoup that third-round pick, because Chuck Long could be the Boomer Esiason of this draft. If he starts lasting a little bit and teams start going for other positions, he could start lasting longer than people think. But the Colts now are in pretty good position to maybe make a trade, as is St. Louis coming up next.
Maybe very quietly, the guy the Colts wanted all along was John Hand. We will see. Bob Lee, what do you think?
Oh, I think that the Colts certainly are in disarray. They traded up the fourth, ostensibly to get a quarterback. And ostensibly thinking that Everett out of Purdue would put some fannies in the seats at the Hoosier Dome. And he is not available because he has been selected by Houston as the number 3 selection. We're waiting on Indianapolis' selection. But Jim Everett, starting as a backup to Scott Campbell, really came on his junior year. This past year with his 5th year with the Boilermakers. They say, Paul, maybe a little bit of a sidearm quarterback, but he was the top man coming to the quarterback.
Big, strong, he can run with the ball. This is a Pittsburgh game, and he has a chance for a 2-point play with the last play of the ball game and underthrows the receiver, Bob, in this particular game. It was their first game of the season in Pittsburgh. And the thing about it is that he didn't bother him that much. He was back in play so well all year long. He's the kind of guy that if he throws a bad pass, okay, let's get on with it. And you got to love his attitude.
Jim Everett out of Purdue, selected by Houston. You think, is Indy going to turn around and trade back down? I mean, if you run a deal at 17-9 with the arm, the release, the agility, and the ability to read defenses on a 5.0 scale in each category, Jim Everett rates out to a 17.9. And on the big board right now at quarterback, in the quarterback selection, Long is our top-rated quarterback. Everett number 2, but Everett the first select. Colts going to trade back there? I can't see that.
I don't either. I think because I've been 3 for 3 so far
with the tough ones so far.
No, I'm telling you, here's where they take a defensive lineman. They're going to take Hand or Leslie O'Neal. And my choice would be Leslie O'Neal.
Now, Howard Balzer touched on the fact that maybe Chuck Long now becomes the Boomer Esiason of this draft, and that players begin being passed over. We'll touch on this as the
commissioner is standing by waiting on the Indianapolis Colts selection. Coach Rod Dowhauer is trying to put together his selection. Here's the commissioner.
The Indianapolis Colts. First choice, first round, John Hand, defensive lineman from Alabama. Next up, St. Louis.
Well, that answers the question as far as the Colts go. Will it be offense or will it be defense? It is John Hand, one of the highest rated defensive players in the draft. Let's go back to Chris and Bo Jackson now.
All right, George, thank you very much.
Well, which should you play first, baseball or football, or do you both start?
This young man, and currently no doubts with the Colts.
No, you know, they're not questioning. He's got here. He's the guy that got hurt, Bob, and he's going to be fine, and they're happy with him. There's just no question about that. John Hand is big and strong, and he can play. He's just a good football player. You take a look, and he's been a starter, since he's a sophomore, a full-time starter. So he has the experience to play 6'7", 275, if that's correct. I would imagine he's down just a tad now because they say he's really been working out.
Terrific closing speed. He had some inconsistencies early in his career, but he grades out to an 18.8. His strength, his quickness, ability against the run and against the pass. So John Hand, number 4 selection. St. Louis is up. They've got 8.5 minutes to go, and then New Orleans. This is the 51st selection, the player meeting of the National Football League. It's so high-tech and computerized. Let's step now back in time. Steve Sable with a look at the very first draft.
Institutions in this country have a way of growing from modest beginnings. The NFL draft is no exception. Now, you might be wondering what Robinson's luggage has to do with the draft. Well, this is the old site of the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Philadelphia, and it was here in 1936 that the very first college draft was held. On February 8, 1936, representatives from the 9 NFL franchises gathered in Philadelphia to draft from a list of 90 college athletes. The Bears picked first and took Heisman Trophy winner Jay Berwanger from the University of Chicago. But the economics of the game were different in those days. Can you imagine a Billy Sims or a John Elway telling their team, "Thanks for picking me number 1, but I'm going to quit football and go into the rubber business instead"? Well, that's what Berwanger told the Bears.
I was the first draft choice because that's the first year they had the draft. And I asked George Ellis for $25,000 for 2 years. This was way out of their range. They were paying $100 a game and so forth. And it would have been worthwhile for me to play if I'd have gotten that money. Otherwise, I wanted to go to work and get started in business and wind up doing more or less what I'm doing today.
Berwanger did achieve one form of immortality, however. His likeness became the model for the Heisman Trophy.
And a fine trophy that is. Of course, we've come a long way since those days of the NFL draft, Howard Balzer. The St. Louis Cardinals, a team in the Sporting News' hometown, might they make a trade down? What do you think?
The Cardinals are one of the hardest teams to judge in the NFL. The thing that really got things cooking was 2 weeks ago about when they let it be known that they had Chuck Long in for a workout. So, of course, everyone says, new coach Gene Stallings is unhappy with Neil Lomax. They're going to trade Lomax. They're going to pick Long. I think it was just, again, one of those smoke screens to get other teams to think they were interested in Long so they can trade down. Because they could trade from 5 to, let's say, 15 or 20 someplace in the first round, get just as good a player, and save money. And I think that's one of the factors that the Cardinals take into account when they're drafting.
I wonder whether Gene Stallings, being the Cowboy assistant, would do business with the Cowboys. We know the Cowboys just a couple of days ago had Chuck Long in for a final look. But then again, they're in the same division, and it's tough doing business here. The pick is coming up, so rather than ask the question, I guess we ought to wait about 10 seconds and take a look at what the Cardinals are going to do.
They didn't take their whole 15 minutes, which is something of a surprise. They're looking at the name. It might be Joswiak, or an offensive lineman.
St. Louis Cardinals, first choice.
Or Leslie O'Neal.
Anthony Bell, linebacker, Michigan State.
They pulled one out of the air. That's the St. Louis Cardinals. And they are looking for linebacking help. Stallings has said they're going to the 3-4 defense away from the 4-3 they played a few years ago, for the last few years under Floyd Peters. But Anthony Bell, I don't think he's worthy of the 5th pick in the draft. They probably think they can get him maybe a little cheaper than some other players, but that's a real reach, I think.
So it didn't take long for us to have our first real surprise of the draft. Anthony Bell, 5th pick, going to the Cardinals. George Grant.
Thank you, Chris. The 6th pick will be coming up next. That is the New Orleans Saints. Anthony Bell, your reaction?
Well, my reaction is stunned disbelief. I know that's one of the positions Gene Stallings talked about needing. He's a defensive coach. I thought he'd go defensive line. I thought John Hand, if they were available. He has pick of the board of running backs. It's a top-heavy running back draft. Top-heavy offensive line draft. No running back draft and no offensive lineman draft.
Chris Berman came up with our first best athlete. Paul Zimmerman comes up with our first stunned disbelief of this 1986 draft. We'll be back with more of the draft as we're waiting on...
Here, the big surprise so far in the first round of the NFL draft is Anthony Bell, outside linebacker, Michigan State. A big surprise to Mel Kiper for sure. You had him rated 10th, the 10th best outside linebacker. In fact, you said he is a bit of an overachiever, but a bit overrated. In fact, you didn't expect him to go in the first round at all.
No, it did not. And the only logical reason I can see why St. Louis might have chosen a player is because he fills a position of need, outside linebacker. St. Louis is switching from the 4-3 to the 3-4 this year, with Gene Strong, of course, coming in. But basically, I thought Bell would be a third-round choice, and I thought he was even overrated at that point. In fact, I had him listed as the most overrated player in the entire draft, mainly because he's 6'3", 230, runs under 4'6", benches 450, has good intelligence. The coaches at Michigan State are touting him to be as good as Carl Banks. No way, in my estimation, in my opinion. I just don't think he is a great football player. And of course, to draft a kid this high, you'd have to think he would be. In fact, they could have traded down and still got Anthony Bell. And, you know, Cincinnati, from what I've become aware of lately, had Bell rated as one of their top outside linebackers.
Of course, he can prove us wrong. That's very important.
Well, that could happen, but basically, like I say, they could have traded down and still got Bell. And with other players on the board of top quality, I don't know how you could reach for a kid who probably would have been a second or third round draft choice.
All right, let's discuss for a few moments the issue of need. Houston obviously, or it doesn't seem like they need a quarterback as their first pick. They pick up Jim Everett. The possibility still exists that they could make a trade, and you think the Raiders could be involved with that trade?
Well, in previous years, everybody in the world thought the Raiders had a quarterback problem, except the Raiders. This year, I think they know that they have a quarterback problem. Plunk is coming off the injury at the end of his career. He's a question mark. Rusty Hilger, their sixth-round pick, inexperienced, untested. You can't go into the season with Rusty Hilger. Of course, Mark Wilson's still there. There were rumors about a trade. I would expect a possibility here to be that either Moon or Everett would go to the Raiders. Now, not necessarily today or tomorrow, just like the Colts when they drafted Elway, traded him several weeks later.
Right.
It may happen here. I'm sure the Raiders are now talking with Houston about a possibility of acquiring Warren Moon.
One other variable I do want to mention, in the scouting system, the issue of drug testing is something like 57 players tested positive. Out of a possible close to 400 players tested positive for drugs. How many of those drugs were the so-called dangerous drugs like
Only
cocaine?
3 players were tested positive for cocaine, one of which was a late-round choice. There's only really 2 players affected, and of course they will be affected, probably drop down significantly in this draft. The other players I don't think it will affect at all. I'll monitor that, and I'll check with you, as the draft progresses and let you know how those players are going. I won't mention names, but I'll give you an idea as to if the draft has been affected at all by that testing. I don't think it will be. We're looking for football players, not choir boys.
The other issue, of course, is only 57 players out of a possible almost 400, as I said before. The other thing I do want to mention is that the other drugs involved, the marijuana, which is, depending upon how you look at it, may or may not be a dangerous drug, and morphine tested positive, but that was because of previous surgery with a couple of other players.
Exactly. Recent surgery tested positive for morphine. That's why I think the list of 57 was blown way out of proportion. And only 54 were, like you say, for the marijuana. Not a serious, even though nobody condones drug use. But 54 out of 57 were for marijuana, only 3 for cocaine, and the 2 players will definitely be affected. There's no doubt about that.
Obviously, the Colts were looking for Jimmy Everett, Purdue, hometown boy, essentially, backyard boy. They didn't get him. They didn't go with Chuck Long. Obviously, there was a big disappointment. It would seem like that they didn't get Everett, right?
I would hope so in Indianapolis because of the fact that they traded up with the intention of getting Everett. He's Rod Dowhauer's kind of quarterback. He has that mobility and that athletic ability to move that pocket. He has that strong arm. Of course, the Chuck Long's more of a control-type passer. He's better to go to a team that uses an offense similar to the 49ers. Where he'll slide to, it's interesting. Minnesota still may be able to get him, and they had talked trade earlier in the week. So they can sit right where they are and still probably be able to get a Chuck Long.
Okay. Mel Kiper, thank you very much. We're going to go back to New York now and George Grant. George?
Could those please be returned? Thank you very much, Roy and Mel. We are waiting on the New Orleans Saints selection, their first selection in the first round of this National Football League Collegiate Player Draft. We're looking in on the Saints right now and trying to find out what they are going to do. During the course of this day, we're also going to be...
No, these are the other 2. There are 4 that would feel, not knowing how everyone was going in front of us, we had to consider up to 4, knowing that probably at least 2 of them or 3 of them might be not there based on projections. As it turns out, there are a couple of them that we can talk to. Yes.
Head football Kansas City Chiefs.
Yeah. Right. Where is I? Right behind. Okay.
Right behind. Why would they move? Because we can trade it to somebody else.
Yeah.
Chiefs in their their selection process. And we certainly, with gratitude, appreciate Coach Makovic and the rest of the Kansas City organization for allowing us to eavesdrop a little bit on what's happening in this 1986 National Football League Collegiate Player Draft. We're waiting on the Saints and their selection. Jim Mora, the new coach, may go in a new direction. That'll be up next. Will it be Dombrowski? Will it be Anderson? We'll find out when we return to ESPN's coverage.
I remember too many people saying that was a bad trade.
Let's go to Commissioner.
Selection on the first round, Jim Dombrowski, offensive tackle, Virginia. Next up, Kansas City Chiefs.
All right, Jim Dombrowski, the offensive tackle from Virginia, is the selection of the New Orleans Saints. And this, the first round of the National Football League Collegiate Player Draft. We are waiting on the Kansas City Chiefs. Let's go to Bob Lee and Paul McGuire.
Well, the new regime has made their selection, and Dombrowski, a defensive tackle from Virginia. Now Kansas City is up, and we'll see that war room will be heating up just a little bit. Well, New Orleans really has to set a tone. They've got to make a difference with this new regime. They've got to get out. They have never had a winning season. And Finks, as Zim said, likes the offensive lineman, so he's going for the beef.
Just remember one thing, right? Dombrowski is from Buffalo, New York. Understand that?
I understand
He's a player. He is a player. And I showed you before that I wrote down it'll be Dombrowski, or I think the selection, if it would have been an offensive running back, would have been Gary James at LSU. But it is Dombrowski, and he is a fabulous football player. And the thing that may be questionable about Dombrowski, how long is he really going to play? Because here's a man that's going into medical school. He's decided to do that. And that might have, taken some thought, and that's why they waited so long.
He already has his bachelor's degree because he was a graduate student. Well, Dombrowski, the selection of New Orleans. Let's get a few thoughts from him looking ahead towards his pro career.
I'd say right now is pass protection, because at Virginia we're a run-oriented offense, and I'd say we run 60-70% of the time, so I just haven't pass protected as much as somebody, let's say, who went to BYU. So, but that'll come with practice, so.
Jim Dombrowski, he's from Buffalo, Paul. He's probably the highest drafted player who was a hockey goalie in high school. This man has played ice hockey, but he's going on to med school possibly already. Has his bachelor's degree, wants to be an orthopedic surgeon. Outstanding footwork for this young man who is 300 pounds.
He's an excellent pass blocker. He is not, I don't think, the best drive blocker in college football. I think the best drive blocker in college football would be Doug Williams at Texas A&M. But as a pass blocker, he is excellent.
Dombrowski from Virginia, the All-American, 5'2" speed at just about 300 pounds, the number 6 selection overall at 6'5", 296 pounds. So he is the number 6 selection overall, and we'll mention it again to make everybody happy in your hometown. Out of Buffalo, grades out to an 18-2. His best grades on the pass to run and the quickness, knock him down a little bit on his strength. Where are the trades we have been expecting so far, Paul McGuire? Trade. We haven't seen. We saw one yesterday for Hogaboom. Indianapolis did not trade back down. New Orleans, this is the position they selected Dombrowski, having traded down to 6th. Nobody's made a deal yet.
Well, there's only a couple other teams that really want to trade. The trades now want to be down.
Right.
Not up. Which I think is interesting. But, we're looking at Kansas City. Kansas City is a team that's going to, first of all, defense. We're looking at defense. And but all those running backs are there. And this is where they may take another running back, even though they had the first selection last year as a running back.
Well, we checked into the Kansas City War Room. We'll be back there from time to time. They are the next selection. They have 11.5 minutes to go. We are early in round 1. KC to be followed by Minnesota, then Pittsburgh. We'll return to the Marriott Marquis in New York after this.
Teams thinking they might get a good one in the second round now start saying, we better take one now. And this again leads to that Chuck Long situation in terms of who knows where he's going to end up. Minnesota possibility, but you never know when he's going to start sailing. But Renster, to me, getting back to that, he's going to be a guy I think is going to develop into the best offensive lineman in this draft.
Of course, you're talking about trades, and the Chiefs may be trading right now. We will find out in about 8 minutes. There was a question that they might peddle Bill Kenny. Now, they could pick Chuck Long. Of course, they also have Blackledge sitting right there, so maybe Long won't be a factor for the Kansas City Chiefs, but there was rumor that Kenny might go. Of course, he's damaged goods a little bit. He had a bad back last year.
He had a lot of injuries last year. There was a rumor about him being traded to Buffalo for Joe Cribbs. We could see a lot of these trades start to develop later in the draft
when teams have picked their players, and now maybe a team that was considering a running back doesn't get one, and they say, well, we might be interested in Joe Cribbs. The Chiefs, I think, are in a quandary right now because they liked Hand very much. I don't know if they have Leslie O'Neal rated that highly. I think they might be looking at offensive line, but I think what they're saying right now is we can get just as good a player if we draft down a little more. But, of course, other teams know that, and they're not going to give them what the Chiefs want. So I think they might surprise a little and go for the offensive line if they don't make the trade.
We haven't seen those trades of positions yet because maybe when the offensive linemen start to go, the teams at the bottom would want them, like the Jets, etc., may make some trades. Let's go back to George Grant.
Let's pick up on that discussion. You talk about the running back situation with Kansas City. Horton and Hurd, they still are missing one part of that puzzle to put together a strong running back field.
Well, you have a running back core that with no runner who averaged 4 yards a crack, and I remember we went long statistical periods with nobody hitting 100 yards for them. Of course, there's an offensive line problem.
What he can do for their community. And I guarantee you that you're going to see the ones that are in drugs that they know about, that are projected as #1 draft picks, will not be taken.
We have to make the statement up front. There will be players certainly that are passed over. At no time are we going to correlate specific players with the existence of that list. We are not going to do that. But the point is that is going to be a factor. Let's check into the Kansas City draft room. There could be something in the works. Let's eavesdrop now and see what's happening with 40 seconds to go.
Next year. Offensive tackle, West Virginia.
Joziwiak, first name Brian, Brian, offensive tackle, West Virginia University.
Take it up.
All right. City, Joziwiak selected, whose agent at one time had threatened to take him off and want to be a pro wrestler.
Bobby, here's the thing that Paul said, Howard said, I think we all said, that once one of the offensive linemen falls, if he falls early, then they're all going to start to fall. And you're going to see an awful lot of offensive linemen taken in this first round.
You heard the word from Kansas City to the representatives here at the KC table. And now you'll hear it officially from the commissioner.
Kansas City, first choice. Brian Joziwiak, offensive tackle, West Virginia. Next up, Minnesota Vikings.
Joziwiak, the number 7 selection overall. George?
Thank you, Bob. We are waiting now on the Minnesota Vikings, and after that, the Pittsburgh Steelers. This is the first round of the National Football League Collegiate Player Draft. The Vikings could go for that defensive player, Leslie O'Neal, and will the Pittsburgh take a chance on Byers? That's coming up next. Takes a look back at the draft.
Pittsburgh selects Lewis Lips, wide receiver, Southern Mississippi.
The Steelers proved to be right on target with their first-round selection of Lips 2 years ago. The mercurial receiver made it 2 for 2 in Pro Bowls, but unfortunately Lips is the lone diamond in a solitaire Pro Bowl setting as the club's once golden touch in the blue chip rounds has rusted away. The Steelers have exercised 13 blue chip selections in the last 6 years. That's rounds 1 and 2, but have only 4 starters to show for them. One of them, Lewis Lips, is the only Pro Bowl player they've come up with in the blue chip round. Now, if you want to take a closer look and figure out why the Steelers' 6-year absence from the Super Bowl has come about after going 4-0 in the 70s, you would have to look no further than these graphic comparisons. While the Steelers have had moderate success in the opening round, they've come up empty in the second round. How empty? Well, the Steelers don't have a single starter to show for their 7 picks. And look at these mistakes. 4 of their second-round selections are no longer with the team. The lack of success in the blue chip rounds of the 80s is shocking compared to the incredible dividends of the first 2 rounds from 1970 to 1975's drafts. No team has ever enjoyed such blue chip success. Counting Frank Lewis and Dave Brown, both of whom attained Pro Bowl status after leaving Pittsburgh, the Steelers produced a total of 9 Pro Bowl players out of 12 selections in the first 2 rounds of the draft from 1970 through 1975. That, of course, was 10 years ago when the Steelers were a dynasty. Now we are halfway through the 80s. They only have 1 Pro Bowl player to show for their blue chip picks. That is Lewis Lips.
Of course, they have selected some running backs. In '82, they picked Walter Abercrombie, who certainly fits into their running plans right now. But the question is, and some people, some insiders have said they feel Chuck Noll may take a chance on a running back like Keith Byers when we head towards their selection in the draft, which will come after the Minnesota Vikings. new coach Jerry Burns, and the Brain Trust at Minnesota is deciding now what to go. Will it be Leslie O'Neal?
Well, you know, Howard, I think, said a very astute thing before when he said Chuck Long is the Boomer Esiason, drop, drop, drop. You know, every time a pick comes up from now on, we're going to say, well, it could be Long and somebody else. This has happened from year to year. Eddie Brown last year, he kept dropping. Nobody knew why. Turned out to be a terrific pro. 1 year, Sean Farrell, Hunter from Notre Dame 1 year. The sad thing in this climate is with that drug testing and you know, the names, the 57 people. Every time a guy goes lower than he should, people are going to speculate, well, is it a drug thing and everything? And a lot of clean kids are going to get burned. That's the sad thing about this.
This is true in baseball. It's true in basketball, too. With the drug situation, those that aren't tainted become tainted just by association.
Well, I think next year the NFL is going to release names of the ones who are clean.
Paul Zimmerman, who is from Sports Illustrated, and he is clean. We believe he is.
And I'm working with Mr. Clean as well. And we talked earlier about the entire drug situation. Let's step back, take a look at Kansas City selection of Brian Joswiak, who is a concerned and involved citizen involved with the Easter Seals and March of Dimes. Talk about a guy who wants to work in your community. Kansas City has a good one in that regard, and they've got a guy who is 300 pounds, 6'5" and a quarter, out of West Virginia. Had a hip pointer problem this year. Began college on the defensive side of the ball, and then came over to the offensive side.
You just see where he took that defensive end. Just watch the drive blocking of Joswiak. If you can't move him out of there, he's going to fall on people. He's just big and strong.
He was 309 pounds at the combine workout, so I guess it doesn't worry anyone with his weight the way Perry worried everybody last year. But a consensus All-American with 5'9" speed. We grade him on the strength, the quickness, the run, and the pass. Again, your perfect player is a 20.0, and the strength, the top selection, the top number from Brian Joswiak. You said you were with him at a dinner recently, and so he's got his own zip code. We know that he's that large.
I think he has. Here's a guy that has to go to a car wash to get clean because he can't get his hands together to do his face. No, he's that big. You know, they just hook a chain onto his lip and drag him through the wash. It's the easiest way. He is absolutely huge. You can show a double feature movie on this guy's back. He's just an incredible and that nice of a guy. He really and truly is. That's going to fit in very well out there.
Number 7 selection overall. All right. Well, we've got about 5 analogies about how large Brian is. He's the number 7 pick. Minnesota's got just under 8 minutes to go for their pick. Will it be a quarterback? We'll see in just a second.
This will really set the tone for the next 3 picks because Pittsburgh comes up next. They've said, and of course that doesn't mean anything sometimes. I've always said the personnel guys, when they talk to us, they only tell us what they want us to know or what they want other teams to think they're going to do. But Pittsburgh has said they'll go for Keith Byers if no one has taken him. I agree with Paul. If I was a team, I'd be awful hesitant about taking Keith Byers on a team that plays on artificial turf. But if Byers lasts past Pittsburgh, then you have Philadelphia sitting there. I think the 49ers are a candidate to trade into Philadelphia's spot. They've talked a lot about Matt Cavanaugh in recent weeks. Buddy Ryan has been talking about a guy named Anthony Toney, who he could get probably in the 2nd or the 3rd round. He doesn't have to spend a 10th pick. So I think you might see one of your first trades with Philadelphia if Byers is still available.
I don't know that the Byers is the guy that the 49ers might be interested in. I think they might be more interested in Gary James. That's just my opinion. As for Minnesota coming up and then Pittsburgh, as far as Pittsburgh goes with Byers, Chuck Noll is not on the hot seat. He's not going to lose his job if the Steelers don't win next year. They can't afford to wait a year for Byers just because of Noll's situation. The next 3 picks, Minnesota about 3 minutes and 50 seconds left for their pick, and then Pittsburgh, and then Philadelphia. Let's go back to George Grant.
You talk about shrewd people in the draft, Chris. You mentioned Bill Walsh, and usually on draft day, as we found year in and year out, Walsh usually comes up with something, some big story. If it's a Russ Francis trade, if it's a Wendell Tyler trade, something usually comes up with the San Francisco 49ers. We'll see if that develops on this draft day. When we mentioned Brian Joswiak, and I know when I was with him at the Walter Camp All-American banquet, he was an All-American selected by them. We talked about, among other things, the United States Football League, and I asked him, is the USFL an alternative for you in 1986? He said, no, it wasn't. I want to play in the NFL. And of a couple of dozen of these top players that I talked to since the end of the season, it was echoed almost one after another. They do not regard the USFL as the alternative that it has been over the last couple of years.
Well, I guess they don't like money then. I mean, any kid who's trying to get a decent contract better say, as a matter of reflex, well, I've had some pretty good offers. You know, the only thing that gets the price up in this business is competition. Of course, you know, they're a league with a lawsuit and nothing much else right now. But, I mean, certainly, just to flat out say, no, I don't want him, you know, you're just knocking your price down. You know, you got to play a little only veteran that I heard was seriously talking about it was Tom Mitchell of the Cardinals. You know, the league's going to wait to see how their lawsuit comes out and then decide whether they play. That's not a lot to stake your hopes on.
Let's talk about Bo Jackson, too. When you talk about running backs, Bo Jackson is the draft rights of Birmingham in the United States Football League. Some people are saying, look, even if the league doesn't make it, take the money up front from Birmingham and then wait. Now, whether the league makes it is something else. If they do win the suit, then they probably will make it.
You know, they're not exactly stupid over there. At least a few people are. If they're going to pay him a lot of money, they're going to lock him into a personal service. I mean, they'll have him driving a car or something. You don't see Herschel Walker buying out his contract or Kelly. I mean, they hold on to those super guys as long as they can. So if they would sign him, you know, through some weird circumstance, they'd have him pretty well locked in.
The Minnesota Vikings, we're waiting on their selection. Let's take a look at their quarterback depth chart. We talked about the possibility of the Vikings going the route of the quarterback. Here's Tommy Kramer, their starter. But as you can see, the 10-year veteran, when you look ahead, they need a quarterback of the future. Is Bono the quarterback of the future? Is Wayne Wilson the quarterback of the future?
I think they're going to trade. The reason I say that is Paul McGuire just said so.
Offensively, too, when you look at the Minnesota Vikings, you talk their quarterback, but you also talk of their offensive line. Sacks a problem in 1985, and they want to shore it up. They really have, over the years, they've been looking for the big stud, that the Ranieri mold that they had years ago.
Yeah, when I talked to Mike Glenn, I don't know, a week and a half ago, he said trade down for offensive line. He liked Joe Zwiak very much. He would probably have to like Greenstra. But now Long is there. He didn't say anything about Long. Since then, teams have told me that he's trying to trade up to get Long. Unless that was some sort of a smoke show. You know, they play these games, these negotiating games, you can get a headache from it. Long seems logical. Offensive line seems logical. Trade down seems logical. They've done that so many years. There's so much logic here that I don't crazy.
We're waiting on the selection of the Minnesota Vikings. This is the first pick. After the Vikings will come the Pittsburgh Steelers and then the Philadelphia Eagles, remember, with their new coach, Buddy Ryan. So very easily there could be some further activity coming up. Trade possibility, they've talked about the possibility of San Diego being involved in a trade. As the clock winds down, let's go to the commissioner. That's Jan Van Duzer with him. Here's Jan Van Duzer.
San Diego and Minnesota have completed a trade. San Diego has made a selection. San Diego has traded Green Bay's first-round selection in this draft and San Diego's second in this draft to Minnesota for Minnesota's first and third in this draft.
San Diego selects defensive end Leslie O'Neal from Oklahoma State. Next up, Pittsburgh.
Okay, there you have it. The commissioner announcing that Leslie O'Neal has been selected by the San Diego Chargers in a trade with Minnesota. So again, the selection goes to San Diego. Surprise?
Yeah, it's no surprise at all. I mean, Mike Lynn said that a week and a half ago. The surprise was that the word was that he might trade up. You know, from Houston. Houston swore that he talked to him about trading up. Now, presumably it was. I don't think it was forever. Trading down is their history. You know, they save money that way. They figure, well, one player is pretty much like another. You know, it's kind of a defeatist type philosophy.
What will Leslie O'Neal do for the San Diego Chargers? We'll investigate that when ESPN's live and continuous coverage of the 1986 NFL Draft will continue. When we're back, we'll go to Sports Look and Roy Firestone.
The AMA has accepted hypnosis since 1958. Mr. Charles Ward, a certified hypnotherapist with 12 years of clinical therapeutic experience.
Stop smoking, lose weight, develop to your utmost potential. You possess the most powerful tool required to break your bad habits. I want you to say, I like myself, stop smoking, lose weight, develop to your utmost potential with hypnosis.
We'll meet you in the comfort and convenience of your own home. Call now, 322-8365. Catch the action, emotion, tension, and triumph at the $450,000 McDonald's Championship. Watch world champions like Jan Stevenson, Alice Miller, and Beth Daniel compete to win at the White Manor Country Club June 4th through the 8th. Share the excitement while the pros play and the kids win. Net proceeds benefit Ronald McDonald Children's Charities, including Ronald McDonald Houses, making a tough course easier for kids. So come join the winners at the McDonald's Championship.
Roy Firestone here from Los Angeles with Mel Kiper. You just heard a few moments ago that Leslie O'Neal went to the San Diego Chargers out of Oklahoma State, a defensive end, 6'3", 245. Mel Kiper, of course, with his draft prospectus. We were discussing before about Leslie O'Neal, the fact that he is somewhat small for his position. The Chargers not thinking that's too much of a liability.
No, they're really not, Roy. They really liked Leslie O'Neal. And, of course, Minnesota was in a position where they could trade down. Of course, Chuck Long's still there, Rainster's still there, Neil Anderson's still there. They're in a position where they picked up a third-round choice. A good move for the Vikings, a great move for San Diego. Of course, you know, people think after Hand, O'Neal, Casillas, it's a major drop-off as far as defensive linemen are concerned. That's just not the case. There's a player at Notre Dame, Eric Dorsey.
You love Eric Dorsey.
Well, he's got as much physical ability as any defensive lineman in this draft, including John Hand. He's 6'4", he's up to 285. He's been clocked this week at 4'7", 4'7", 8", which is an outstanding time for a 285-pounder. He's one of these strong kids, 425 bench press. He was playing out of position at nose tackle, and we talked about Jerry Faust. During his regime, he recruited good football players. Every year they had the top recruiting class, but oftentimes they were played out of position. Eric Dorsey was one of the players that I'm referring to in this case. He was worked at nose tackle, moved to end this year after the first 3 games. He finished the year at defensive end playing as well as anybody in the country. And he will be an outstanding first-round pick for a team looking for a defensive end, particularly maybe the New York Giants or the Cincinnati Bengals.
Of course, you always know that they're pretty bright kids coming out of Notre Dame, too.
Right.
Let's talk about the Keith Byers theory that Paul Zimmerman alluded to a few moments ago. But before we do that, let's go to a draft pick coming up. Here's Keith.
Next up, Philadelphia Eagles.
Back at the Marriott Marquis Hotel Ballroom, Commissioner Pete Rozelle has just selected the Pittsburgh Steelers selection here in the first round. John Renstra, a guard from Temple, selected by the Pittsburgh Steelers. So they did not select Keith Byers at all. Let's go back out to Roy Firestone, and we'll update you on the next selection, the Philadelphia Eagles, when we return.
Okay, we just got the tail end of that. We were talking a few moments ago about Keith Byers and the theory that he should play perhaps on regular grass as opposed to artificial surface because of his injured foot, when in fact it really is a little toe, not a foot, a little toe injury. You said something interesting, that Rocky Bleier played all those years for the Steelers with no toe at all. He had it blown off in Vietnam.
Exactly, and had a great career. Of course, Jack Lambert had the big toe injury, which is responsible for your balance. And of course, it ended his career. You mentioned, Zim made a good point about the grass. Of course, the San Francisco 49ers are sitting down there midway through the first round and, have a chance to get a Keith Byers possibly. As far as Pittsburgh selection, I haven't gotten a word on as to who they took yet. Yeah. But basically, Keith Byers would be a good choice for a team down in that point in the first round.
Yeah, we were a little bit in the dark, folks. We just now caught the tail end of that Pittsburgh draft. Perhaps in a few seconds we'll get the information passed along to us. Before we do that, I also want to mention the Bo Jackson issue of the baseball player as opposed to the football player. Yesterday on our Sports Lit program, we had Sid Thrift, the general manager of the Pittsburgh Pirates, said that he would not take Bo Jackson. Of course, they have the #1 pick in the amateur draft. Would not take Bo Jackson #1. In fact, he says they cannot compete economically with professional football, which is unusual because baseball players make more money than football players. But most importantly, he said that it is a lot harder to hit a curve than to hit a hole in football. And he thinks that he would just be a good prospect, but not necessarily a great prospect for baseball.
That's exactly right. He'll be an immediate impact player for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The team that is in a good warm weather climate, plays on a grass surface. They have a great back in Wilder, who will move over to fullback, a good young quarterback in Steve Young, an improving line, a wide receiver like House, and of course a tight end like Giles. That team could make an immediate elevation up the ladder in that Central Division, maybe contending for the divisional title within the next 2 to 3 years, with the addition of Bo Jackson, plus the other choices that they have in this draft. Of course, Pittsburgh took John Reinstra. I just got word of that.
He used to get word of that.
And of course, that's their kind of lineman. Strong kid, can come in there and play immediately, and is that great drive blocker, which they like.
One of the things I also want to mention is that there are 3 players already in the first 10 picks that are over 300 pounds. The big boys are back in the NFL. We'll come back with more of our live coverage of the NFL draft on ESPN. Coming back right after this.
first round selection. Running back, Ohio State, Keith Byers. Next up, Cincinnati Bengals.
That's the 10th selection in round one. The Bengals are up next to be followed by Detroit, but someone has put some chips there out on the table. They're not playing red or black. They're playing a specific number here in this roulette game with Keith Byers. So the Eagles have gone for Keith Byers. They needed some more help there. Just to backtrack and update you where we have been. San Diego and Minnesota working a trade in the number 8 spot in the first round. San Diego with that trade, trading first-round positions with Minnesota. There's more to that trade we'll tell you about in a second. Leslie O'Neal selected, the defensive end out of Oklahoma State, outstanding performer. And you had a chance several times seeing him in person this year, Paul McGuire.
He is so quick, and it really is tough to block him. Not only is he quick, but look at the strength of Leslie O'Neal. This is against Nebraska, and he can stand at the line of scrimmage for pass rush.
Better pass rushing against the run, would you think?
Much better pass rusher, but you watch how he closes down the line of scrimmage. He's got excellent pursuit. I guess that's the expression, nose for the ball.
Yeah.
He has it.
The statistics at 245 pounds, and there's a feeling perhaps you could add maybe another 15 or 17 pounds to that frame and carry it into the front.
Yeah, and I don't, you don't know if they're thinking linebacker for this guy, but he's the kind of guy that you can, on his frame, when you see Leslie, he looks thin at 345.
We grade him out at an 18.4. You know, death, taxes, and the fact that the Chargers come into the draft in need of defensive help. You can put money on it. They draft